All right, folks, welcome back to Flatiron Tuning. We're here in the shop, and as we're recording this video, for the record, it is April 9th. It is, let's call it 12:52 p.m. That is significant because as we were setting up to record this video talking about tariffs and their effect on imported auto parts, the announcement came through that some of these tariffs have now been paused for 90 days. We're still going to dive into this just as we were before and give you all the information as it was before. And the reason is because these new tariffs, they're just paused. It's not turned off. This still might come into play. And this is going to cause like either a big or a significant change to aftermarket parts and everything that we do here. And that's why this has been kind of keeping us up at night. And we've been scrambling to try and figure basically all of this out. And, the changes that just came through today, it just shows how volatile and how the situation is constantly changing, which in and of itself causes some stress. But again, it is significant and it's well worth paying attention to. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into it here. All right, so let's back up a bit. Now, I realize probably the last thing you want to hear about is more talk about tariffs. Where this all started was the talk about tariffs being imposed on imported vehicles. And as part of that, there was another piece that I think has largely been missed. There's been a couple articles, and we'll put some links to them in the description talking about it. But it's the fact that auto parts are being tariffed exactly the same as new vehicles. It's separately. Yes, new vehicles are being tariffed based on how many foreign parts are going into them, but parts by themselves, as they're coming across the border, those are also being tariffed. And again, as of April 9th, let's 12:54. The parts tariff is still in place. Now, the reciprocal tariffs, which are the ones that are placed on the countries specifically, those have largely been paused for 90 days. But China is still in effect, and I guess Mexico and Canada are still getting a 10% tariff. It's very confusing. And that confusion, I'm going to try and explain it as best as I can. If you know better than me, please put it down in the comments. But this is a really confusing situation, and that's what's causing us a lot of stress here because this is affecting the price of parts as they come into the country. All right, so let me just explain where this comes from. This is from the executive order that imposed the auto tariffs, and parts are part of it. So to quote from that, and I'll put a link to this in the description as well, basically, subsequent notice in the Federal Registrar shall be subject to a 25% tariff with respect to goods entered for consumption or withdrawn from warehouse for consumption on or after 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on April 3rd for automobiles, and on the date specified in the Federal Registrar for automobile parts no later than May 3rd of 2025. So this parts-specific tariff, also of 25%, is about to come through, and there's just a lot of confusion around it because, first and foremost, it is not every single part that is made in a different country. There is a list of parts, I guess, based on harmonized codes. Specifically, the ones that we know of are engines, combustion or spark ignition and diesel engines, transmissions, drive shafts, electric motors, catalytic converters, turbos and superchargers are specifically called out, clutches, suspension components, shocks and struts, tires, and wheels. These are all specifically called out parts that are going to get this 25% tariff. But there's a lot more. The actual document that has all the harmonized codes, it's something like 4,000 pages. It's a lot. Those are kind of the high points, but there's more. For the sake of this video, let's just assume that it's probably everything. There's probably going to be exceptions. But again, even exactly what this pertains to is confusing, but there's some big ones here. Again, to me, tires is really big, engines is really big, suspension, turbochargers is a really big factor. Say again, for the sake of this discussion, it's going to apply to most auto parts that are coming in that are being manufactured in a different country. Now, with that as the framework, let's first talk about where these tariffs apply, how it works. Okay, so I've got my little display up here, and this is going to be our universal part. We'll just call it the widget. It's going to be a cost of $100 to just make the math simple. So the cost is $100. And if this is made in a foreign country, where the tariffs would come in is when that part goes to port. Okay, now based on our prior experience, yes, we import parts. When I import a part from another country, basically I order the parts from the company that is making it, or the company that has it in the foreign country. I pay them for the parts, and then they ship it over. Now, so originally, like right now, I've paid $100 for the widget, and they ship it over. So I'm paying the shipping. Once it gets into port or goes through customs, then the duties and taxes or tariffs are added on to the cost of the part. Now, I've paid for the part separately, and this is our experience. The bill for the tariffs or the taxes and everything like that, that typically comes later. And it usually comes through via the shipper. So like FedEx, UPS, DHL, whatever the shipping company is that is sending the part, they're the ones that facilitate it going through customs. And they're the ones that will then bill us for, you know, whatever the taxes and tariffs would be on the part. And it usually comes later. You know, let's say 1 to 2 weeks later, after the part has cleared customs, landed with us, then I get the bill for it. Generally speaking, and again, just to kind of keep the math simple, the general tariff usually is about 10%, give or take. And usually it's probably a little bit smaller than that, but again, just to make it simple. So now that the widget has landed, not counting for the shipping, the taxes that are on the widget make our cost on this actually $110. That's the normal flow through. Sometimes, you know, if it's a big order, you might work with a customs agent where we get kind of charged the taxes and tariffs as the parts are moving through. But for us, normally, like if you're air shipping things in, the charges come later. So that's one of the problems here, because there's so much at play, so much at change going on. You could have something land and you think that everything's fine, and then once you finally get charged with those taxes and tariffs, it's actually higher than you expected, and sometimes that can be a pretty big whammy. So just bear that in mind. That's one of the challenges that we're working through. All right, so now let's talk about what's new and what's different. All right, so let's take our widget, we'll put it back over here at its country of origin. So the new thing that's happened as part of this parts tariff is a 25% tariff on these auto parts. Let's call it just auto parts in general. So now when we order the widget, we get the standard tariffs, and the auto parts tariff at 25% is added on to the cost of the widget as it lands in port. Then once it lands to us and we get charged for those taxes and tariffs, well, now that's a $35 charge instead of a $10 charge. That's with the new auto parts tariff. And this is any auto part that is made of foreign manufacturer or shipped in from overseas. That's a pretty big change. Now, the other part to this that we have to talk about is these new reciprocal tariffs that apply to different countries. Because from everything that I have been able to tell or to find out, that is a separate tariff that is also going to apply to parts in this way. And again, as right before we recorded this, these have been paused for 90 days, but they're not removed. They're still at play. And there's a couple countries that now have this reciprocal tariff still in place. So what that means is that in the case of these reciprocal tariffs being in place, we order the widget that again was $100. Once it lands and goes through customs at the port, we're getting charged with the basic tariff, the fact that it's a part, so the $25 tariff, and then whatever the country-specific tariff might be is added to that as well. For the first example, we're going to talk about Japan, okay? Because we primarily deal with Subaru parts. The reciprocal tariff put on Japan was 24%. So for a $100 widget, that's $24. And so then that would then also get added on to the part here. Now, when we land, so we paid for a $100 widget, and then when our tax and duties tax and tariff bill comes, we're getting charged the $10 that we normally would be, $25 because it's an auto part, and in the case of this part, if it's coming from Japan, an extra $24 for that as well. So now just the tariffs alone are $59 for this $100 widget. Okay, so that's a pretty big increase. One of the questions that I have is, does the auto parts tariff apply in conjunction with the reciprocal tariff? And again, everything that I can tell is the answer is yes. There's some school of thought that the answer is no, that one or the other is going to apply, but not both. Again, this confusion, especially when you figure, like this part could have been landed here for a week or two before we actually get the bill and know for sure what has happened. Well, that can cause some stress and strain. Let's first talk about some other common reciprocal tariffs. What could we be looking at here? And we'll put something up on the screen. So again, this first example is Japan, and that's because we deal with Subaru. Most of the Subaru parts are made in Japan. There's a lot of parts that we import from Japan. So that's a pretty common one. All right, so let's talk about Australia or the UK. So in the case of those parts, it's only a 10% reciprocal tariff. So then that would be less, but still added on. And so potentially in this case, once we receive the part, the duties and taxes that we would be charged would be $45 instead of the $59. So that's better, but it's still, again, remember this is a $100 widget that we were typically paying about $110 for. That's still a lot higher. And then the other one, of course, a couple of days ago, it would have been like China and Vietnam. Now it's just Vietnam. Everything's kind of gone haywire with China. But Vietnam is still worth talking about, and that's a 34% tariff, which would be $34. Why Vietnam, you might ask? Well, it turns out that there's a lot of parts manufacturing that has moved to Vietnam. Most specifically here with some of the Australian companies. Some of the Australian companies have actually moved their manufacturing to Vietnam. And so now that tax on Vietnam-made parts is 34%. That's a huge difference. So in the case of these guys, our widget here gets hit with that tax and tariff once it comes through port, and then to us, it's $34.25, so $59, $69 is the extra charge on this $100 widget, compared to the $110 that we used to be paying. So this is causing a big influx or big change in the cost of parts as they land to us, just depending on whichever reciprocal tariff might also apply. Partially, this is just leaving us scrambling to try and figure out what are these parts going to cost. Okay, we don't know exactly, and there's a lot at play. And again, today is the perfect example for how variable all of this is. This is just the part landing to us. Okay, we then have to sell this part. Now, generally, and if you Google this, what you will find is that the average markup on an automotive part, average revenue, is between 20 and 30%. Let's just split the difference, 25%. We are going to mark the widget up 25%, and that's what we sell to you, to the customer, because obviously we have to make money. That this is our margin. So in the normal case where we're just playing our old $10 tariffs, our widget landed to us would be $110. With that 25% markup, our retail price is $146. $146.66 if you want to get exact, but that's with the normal 25% margin. Now, if we just have to pay the parts, this new parts tariff, the 25%, so in the case of our widget, an extra $25. So our cost would go up to $135. With the 25% markup, then your retail price is $180. So we're up roughly $34 just because of the parts only tariff. Now, if the reciprocal tariffs are added into that as well, like if we're coming across from Japan, well, then with that 25% markup, our original cost would be $159, 25% markup, retail price is now $212. So from $146 to $212 if the part is coming from Japan with that 24% markup, in addition to the 25% parts markup. If we're coming from like Australia or the UK, the 10%, it is a better story here. With the parts, nothing changes with the parts only markup because that's on everything. But with the country specific change, the extra 10%, that would be $193 versus the $146. And then the worst case scenario, at least as of a day ago, I don't know how many minutes ago, was the 34%, say from Vietnam. And then that would be a $225 part. So depending on where it's coming from, depending on these reciprocal tariffs, with the parts tariff, this part could go from $146 all the way up to $225. Just depending on what it is. So that is what we're working with, and that's what we're up against. Now, as an example, let me give you a real world example of a price update that we truly received yesterday. It was a part that we had on our website, retail price $211. It's a part that we don't sell often. I don't stock it. We got a price update that our new cost on this part jumped up to $276, and retail price is now like $412. Now, it's a part that I don't think people were too excited about paying $211 for before. I can tell you at $400 and above, like, it's kind of ridiculous. But that's the degree, and that's a real example of a price update that came through that we're seeing. So some of this is starting to percolate through. Some manufacturers are having to basically figure this out. What I can tell you is I've reached out to everybody that I can possibly reach out to, manufacturers, U.S. hubs, U.S. importers, warehouse distributors, and basically pretty much to a person, all of us are in the same boat. Like nothing is concrete, nothing is for certain. As of today, again, you have a really good sense as to why. But there's some manufacturers that are realizing, okay, we've got to try and get ahead of this as best as we can. And so they're giving their best guess, and they're redoing their prices and sending them out, and we're having to then adjust them. So where this creates issues for us is in a couple ways. One is that with this volatility, there's a very good possibility that, we order a part in, goes through customs, lands to us at the store, and it costs us a lot more than we expected it to. But if we've sold it at the old price, well, how do you handle that situation? It's going to be pretty easy to lose margin or hope to break even at that point. As an example, because this is what is currently in place for the majority of countries, let's just talk about the 25% parts fee. So we'll take away the reciprocal tariffs, but let's just use that parts tariff only as an example, okay? So the parts come in, lands to our shop, it's an extra $25 on this $100 widget. So normally our expected cost would be $110. Now it's $135. If we don't change our sale price is $146.66. Let's call it $147. We're making now $12 instead of $37 or something like that. So the margin go down significantly. We break even and make a little bit, but it might not be enough to cover, because remember, we had to pay to ship this in. It might not be enough to cover the shipping. So that's a problem in and of itself. The other thing that's going on here, and I'm not going to dive into it too much, but I've got here, our shop or the U.S. hub or distributor. Well, whoever's importing the parts is dealing with all this as described. But if we're buying parts from a U.S. distributor or a U.S. hub for a brand, well, then they have to mark it up to us again. So if it's getting that much more expensive for them, is whoever's doing the importing, well, now they're marking it up to us to some extent, and then our price is still going to go up, maybe actually even more than what it was before, kind of like this example of the lug nuts that went up, 50% more to us at this point. So costs are going to go up. That's the one thing I can tell you for certain. It's just a question of the degree, and then really how fast and when is this all going to come into play. So the first question that I'm sure that people would ask is, well, why wouldn't you just stock up? Why wouldn't you just order in as much as you can, get ahead of these new fees so that you can maybe outlast it? Because again, it's a variable environment. If you've got something on the ocean that's going to take 6 weeks to come across, man, you ship it now, 6 weeks from now, who knows what's going to happen? The thing you got to factor in is the margins that we're talking about here. Again, we're going with the average of 25%. So what that means is that if I buy a widget and I ship it over here, and I'm making a 25% margin on this widget, I have to sell 4 of these widgets to be able to buy 1 more. And because in the auto parts world, that's kind of the general margin that we're talking about here, generally speaking, most auto parts retailers, especially when you get to our level where we're selling direct to the public, most of us are not having huge, giant warehouses. That's the job of the WDs, the warehouse distributors. They bring in a whole lot of product and can sit on it, and they're able to kind of make this work because of the volume that they deal in. If we're not able to deal in that kind of volume, like it doesn't make sense for me to order 5 of these in so that I can order 1 more. There's no growth in that. So that's where we have to kind of order and have our inventory arrive just in time. So basically, we kind of know what our average orders are. So we've got some things moving in so that we can, fill an average order over, let's say, a 2-week period, a 1-month period. And then if we get more orders in that time, we'll order extras over, we'll bring things in and ship them out as needed. So this is where not being able to stockpile, like a 6-month supply and only have maybe a 2-month supply means that our ability to absorb and deal with these changes goes way down. Because again, like if the worst case scenario happens and all of these fees get added onto the widget, basically if I'm selling it for less than I have in it, if I'm selling at a loss, I definitely can't then keep ordering more widgets in. That's kind of another aspect of what we're up against. These changes are going to come through, and because we cannot absorb the degree to which these are changing, even if it is just the 25% parts tariff that we're talking about here, that's where pricing is going to have to change just so that we can kind of maintain that status quo and kind of keep the business operating, keeping the lights on it, as it were, and that sort of thing. Something else that's worth mentioning here is, So we're talking about an average price or an average margin of 20 to 30% on a widget. The more expensive the widget gets, the margin generally actually goes down. And some of the most expensive things we have on our website is actually the narrowest margin. And so the more expensive the item is, if that's the case where the margin goes down, then there again, as far as being able to order in a 6-month supply, the ability to do that just goes less and less and less. And the need to try and stay ahead or stay on top of this pricing situation as best as we can becomes even more critical because of the expense of the part. And so that's a big challenge that we're up against currently. Even parts that are made in the US can still be subject to changes in this way. How is that, you ask? Well, because they might be final assembled here in the US, but there's a lot of companies that are buying pieces and parts from overseas where the pieces are going through this same process of getting cost added through these tariffs. And then all of these pieces come together and are final assembled in the US. So the part is final assembled here, but there's a lot of pieces that go into that kit. Just think of anything that you see where you pull up the picture and there's like a bunch of hoses and metal parts and maybe a big chunk in the middle or something like that. There's a lot of bits and pieces to it. Well, all of those bits and pieces are not necessarily done here in America. Maybe some of them are coming from overseas. Those are all going up. And then, hopefully, maybe some final assembly is done here. So it really is made in the US, but it's still going to get more expensive. So even if it's a made in the USA part, it might not be as significant as this, but there's probably still going to be some change that comes through to even made in the USA parts. As best as I can give you, that is the layout that we're working with right now. One other possibility that might come to fruition here is that some of the US hubs, distributors, like Subaru, for instance, Subaru has giant warehouses here. They have the ability to stockpile and have months supply. They might be able to absorb some of this, distribute it out over their entire inventory so that the price changes are going to be more minimal or take a lot longer to get to the full maximum that we've kind of talked about here. So that is a possibility too, but all of these importers are trying to figure all this stuff out as we are. And as all of this stuff is changing, their plans are changing as well. So that's a possibility, and that will possibly soften the blow, reduce the potential increase, or at least delay it significantly. So that's kind of maybe the silver lining or the thing that we have to hope for, is that whatever the situation that we're working through is, it could be resolved in time so that maybe some of these increases are going to be much less or delayed to the point where maybe the situation is resolved, these tariffs go away, and things kind of get back to normal. That's I guess kind of the best case scenario at this point, but it's worth hoping for. But that's what's going on with the tariffs. That's what we're working through. And I wanted to make this video to talk about this because, again, just the fact that the auto parts are being tariffed, not just the cars, I think it hasn't been discussed as much. And this is everything. So this is like not just us, not just aftermarket tuner parts. This is like you go to Napa. You're getting an oil filter at Napa. You're getting something at your general auto parts store, at the dealership, or at us at your local performance shop. All of us, we're all in the same boat. All of this change is coming through, and we're all trying to figure all this out. So, please bear with us. It is a challenge. I cannot tell you. I'm almost two decades doing this. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think most people probably still doing this have ever seen anything like this, and hopefully we'll never see it again. So it is a wild situation. We're just doing our best. So thank you again for your patience. Thank you very much for your support as always. Everything you guys do, with ordering through flatironsstudio.com, we greatly appreciate it. Just keep your eyes out for the news and pay attention to this and see what happens. And, if anything else more conclusive comes through, anything else changes, we're going to do our best to bring that information to you in whatever form makes the most sense. And just know that here at Flatirons Tuning, we've always tried to give you guys the best value possible for all the prices that we offer. That's still going to be the case going forward. It's just, man, it is a heck of a challenge right now, and we're just going to figure out the way to do that as best we can so that we can stick around and keep doing this as long as possible while keeping the lights on. So, yeah, thank you again for your support. As always, appreciate it. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons Tuning.